Hi, my name is Allison Helton, and I'll be talking about how I believe that drug tests should be used on student athletes to determine their eligibility. At the end of my presentation, my audience will be convinced that student athletes should be required to take a drug test to determine their eligibility. Whoa, Johnny really beefed up this year for football. Drug use in athletes should be checked regularly. If a student is using performance enhancers during their sports season, they could be putting a lot of people in danger. Many college athletes may find the requirements burdensome or stressful to deal with. For this reason, many student athletes turn to drugs or alcohol to deal with the stress and pressures they're facing. Last year, I graduated high school. All 4 years, I played varsity softball, and I never really had a problem with any of the players using drugs or performance enhancers when playing their sport. But the sport of the town was always football. At our high school, drug tests were not mandatory, and they were never given, even if there was rumor that someone was using a drug. There were drug users in basketball and football, from what I know. This caused a lot of controversy in the high school. Some students wanted them kicked off the team because of uneven playing time, or they sided with them. If drug tests were mandatory, this would have never happened. When students are required to drug test to play a sport, it will increase safety in opponents, the team in general, fans, coaches, the school's reputation, and the player him or herself. Any person using a drug and playing a sport is putting themselves and others up for health risks. Gary Becker wrote in 2005 in his Doping of Sports article that performance enhancers like steroids and other forms of doping have a negative effect on long-term health. Every athlete has some sort of fan. Whether your fans are your parents, younger kids, your friends, you all have people looking up to you when you're playing that sport. When you're a high school basketball player, you know you have younger kids looking up to you and they want to be just like you. What if one day your drug problem took a hold of your sports career and you couldn't play anymore? I believe drug tests would prevent students from using the drugs. For example, if you knew you couldn't do any sort of drug when you're playing your sport, and you knew your athletic director or coach was going to give you a drug test, would you still do the drug? Greg Schwab testified for the hearing of steroid use in professional baseball and anti-doping issues in the amateur sport before the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce and Science Affairs that when a professional athlete admits to using steroids, the message young athletes hear is not always the one that is intended. Young athletes often believe that steroid use by their role models gives them their permission to use, that it is simply part of what one must do to become an athlete just like them. The solution to this problem would be a drug test on all student athletes. If student athletes were drug tested, they would either quit the drug or quit the sport. It would increase safety for fans and other athletes, coaches, and the student would be healthier themselves. If student athletes were drug-free, it would be a safer playing field for everybody. Not only would the students be safe and healthy, but the fans, coaches, opposing teams, etc. would all be in a safer environment when around the sport. When players use drugs, they put everyone they come into contact with at risk of injury. They may not understand how strong the drugs make them or how angry or violent they make them. Think, players use drugs to enhance their performance, hence why they're called performance-enhancing drugs. This puts the athlete at an advantage, they think, over other players, where this isn't the case. They're actually putting themselves and others at risk of injury, short-term and long-term. If students were tested of these substances, they wouldn't have this type of danger on the field or on the court. If schools stayed the same, not drug testing student athletes, things would continually fall downhill. When students are required to drug test to play any sport, it will increase safety in opponents. Drug tests should be required if you're playing any sort of sport in the school. In your school, how many athletes do you know that use drugs during their sports season? Make a change, talk to the athletic director, and get the ball rolling with a mandatory drug test in your school. We all need to make a change to make a healthier and safer environment to play sports. Drugs don't need to be in anybody's body to say the least, whether you play a sport or whether you don't. But when athletes start using drugs, it makes the sport 10 times more dangerous. Mandatory drug tests would eliminate these dangers for everyone involved in the sport, get the drug users to quit, or get them off the field.